Mac Power Users, episode 650, Craft Deep Dive. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I'm joined by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks.
Hey, Stephen. How are you?
I am great. We're in summer. There's something fun about summer, I think.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
hot,
man.
but your routine changes. I don't know. I'm enjoying the last couple weeks of it.
Did I tell you I've officially given up on surfing?
Have you? Did something happen?
I went out again and first of all, I need to lose some weight. I got some COVID weight, so my balance is all screwed up. And then I just I just hurt all over the next day. And I'm just not going to do that anymore. I sent a note to Craig Hockenberry and he's like, oh yeah, man. I kind of don't do that anymore either. And Craig's got this, rep, he lives in Laguna. He's a surfer dude. So I decided I'm switching to boogie boarding, but this is a good time to boogie board in California. The weather's nice. The ocean's getting a little warm.
That's hilarious.
I agree with you, man. It's all good. All the good summer stuff.
Last week, my wife and kids were out of town. She does this trip with a friend of hers that her friend also has a couple of kids, and they all go to the beach together for a week in the summer. And her husband, he works at a university, and there's some week in the summer where he's really busy at work. So he works, then I stay here and work. So it works out nicely for everybody. But I got a picture from the beach of my youngest son, who is he's going to be 8 this fall, and he, like a lot of people, have not gotten a haircut in a long time. So he's long blonde hair, and he's standing on the beach, and he has a boogie board under his arm. And I thought about you. I was like, he is living the California life. It was the Gulf of Mexico, so not quite the same, but pretty close.
Yeah, if you're listening to the show, and I know it sounds very hippie, granola toast, or was it avocado toast, California, but if you ever get a chance to go in the ocean and do some body surfing or even boogie boarding, and boogie boarding is the most basic. You take a piece of foam and you hold on to it and the wave pulls you in. It's thrilling. It's just thrilling, I mean, I don't know what to say. Occasionally you're going to wipe out and get, water up your nose, and you're going to get sand in your trunks, but it's all worth it. It's so fun. I think, whenever we get you out here, Stephen, I think I'm going to take you boogie boarding.
Okay. I'm down. I am down for that.
I wonder what you'll break that day. Your Apple Watch, maybe get sand in your phone.
It's been a minute since I've broken anything. So
that's what I'm thinking. You're due, Before we get so today we're doing a deep dive. I love doing deep dives. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about some housekeeping.
Okay. Yeah, we've got about 2 weeks left on my Kickstarter for the 2023 Apple hardware calendar. It's gone really well so far. If you didn't see it, I released the artwork for the stickers. So the highest end tier, you get everything, plus you get these pack of stickers that are cartoon versions of Apple hardware. They're fantastic. I loved them last year, and I absolutely love them again this year. And so go check those out.
Yeah, the trash can Mac sticker has a broom next to it.
Yeah. It's really good. I think my favorite is it's the original iPod kind of being snuggled in its own headphones. He just looks so happy and cozy.
Yeah, that is pretty cute. That's pretty cute, man.
Yeah, my friend Jelly does these, and he always does such a good job.
They look great. Today on More Power Users, I have some laptop conundrums in my life, and I'm just gonna turn it over to Stephen. Stephen is going to make a decision for me today, and that's all I'm going to say for now. But we'll explain more later.
Okay, yeah.
In fact, let's just start there, Stephen. I did a bad thing. Stephen.
I know what you did, but you should confess to the audience.
I went into the Apple Store to look at the M2 MacBook Air again. And the Apple Store employee is like, oh, hey, we've got some of the better, he's like, oh, this is the new thing. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I said, but I would never buy these stock builds. And he's like, oh, did you know we have better builds in stock right now? I'm like, well, what do you have? And he had a space gray 1 terabyte, 16 gigabyte M2 MacBook Air in stock.
It's a pretty good spec.
I bought it, man. I just bought it. I didn't, I went back and forth. I said, I'm not going to buy one. I bought it. I bought it with the intention of returning it. I wanted to see if there was room in my heart. I did a note to the labs members. Is there room in my heart for M2 MacBook Air? And, having played with one when we went to Cupertino, I heard you teasing Mike Hurley about that, by the way, and I'm glad you did. But it's not too soon. Anyway, so when you and I were in the Steve Jobs Theater,
yes, that's right.
we were fondling them. That was nice, but I wanted to see how it ran with my software on it.
Sure.
And I felt guilty buying it. I talked to an Apple Store friend later, and he said, well, don't worry about it. That Apple totally gets that sometimes you buy one with the intention of kicking the tires, and people return them all the time because they don't work right enough. And so I was thinking, first of all, do I want one at all, or I'm just going to stick with the 16-inch? I have a 14-inch MacBook Pro that has been now recalled on me. It was loaned to me by an attorney friend, and his wife ruined her laptop. So he's like, I need that back now.
How did he feel about you having put the beta on it?
I am in the process. In fact, if you heard earlier in the show accidentally on the mic, you heard the startup chime because I am now trying to figure out how to unwind that. I'm sure it's possible, but I haven't looked into it yet. And
yeah, it's not too bad to do on the Mac.
Yeah.
A lot easier than an iPhone, that's for sure.
Didn't they add a feature? Let's just go down that rabbit hole. Okay. Didn't they add a feature where you can kind of erase and reinstall the OS just like on the iPhone?
So there's a feature in the Apple Silicon Macs. If you are in system preferences, there's a menu item somewhere called... Actually, I'm sitting in front of an Apple Silicon Mac now. I keep forgetting that I don't have an Intel Mac anymore. It's under system preferences, erase all content and settings. That will leave the OS in place, though. So, you restart it and it's a new Mac. What you have to do is go into recovery mode and format the internal drive and then install Monterey on it.
Yeah. And then I probably have to download Monterey somewhere to reinstall
I think the restore process will probably do it for you.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I need to do that and get it back to him. And I was totally fine. I'm going on vacation in a week for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'll just bring the 16-inch and just deal with it. But now I have this little thing in the house. So I bought it with the intention of returning it. But I kind of like it. It's space gray. And, the color situation, I don't know what I'm going to do. But so I have a couple options. My first option was I'm going to try it. And if I don't like it, I'll just return it and be done with it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm going to want a separate little portable laptop. So the next question is, do I return it and then just order one with a color of my choice and probably more RAM? I think the 1 terabyte is fine.
Yeah. We'll make that decision later.
Well, let me just lay out
okay.
I'm not going to make the arguments. I just want to lay out the question. So I can keep a space gray 1 terabyte, 16 gigabyte MacBook Air right now, and I can take it on vacation with me and not have to bring the big one. Or I can return it and then go through the process of making an order for a spec that's a little different. And I have decided that I need an adult to make the decision for me.
Okay.
So today, in More Power Users, Stephen is going to decide.
Okay. Well, what are your impressions so far of the machine? I mean, hands-on is cool, but it's quick. You've now been living with it and carrying it around. And I'm really curious for you to compare it maybe with the 14-inch MacBook Pro, because they're not that dissimilar in size, but they're really different in terms of capability and ports and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the 14-inch is way faster. I mean, I render a labs video on the 14-inch, even running Ventura next to the MacBook Air, and the 14-inch does it in about a third of the time. But the MacBook Air still does it. The screens are definitely better on the MacBook Pro. I mean, this MacBook Pro is not an option for me. I have to return it. But if I was to buy one, it's like $2,500 to buy one of these 14-inch MacBook Pros, even at a kind of a low build. But it's better in every way. But the lightness and thinness of the MacBook Air, when I combine it with the fact that I already have a monster 16-inch MacBook Pro, that kind of fills the need for me. I want something that when I need to get on the road, I don't have to bring the beast with me. You know, my daughter just recently moved and she had people delivering stuff and setting up the cable, and I wanted to be there because I'm a dad, right? I didn't want her there alone. And so I went up there for the day and I brought the beast, but it would have been nice to have one of those little Macs that I could have just done a bunch of work on. The screen comparisons, it is better on the 14-inch, but if you don't have a 14-inch sitting next to it, you don't notice. The 120 versus 60 frames per second, I definitely don't notice. The hard work render speed, like when I'm doing Final Cut and ScreenFlow stuff, is slower and the thing gets hot. But you know what? It does the renders. I did a 16 gigabyte file with a render that took like 30 minutes. And when on my MacBook Pro, that would have been like a probably 10-minute job. But it did it. And at the end, it was the same video. I mean, I was able to upload it.
Yeah.
So I don't think I would want this as my only computer, but I'm looking for a second machine that I can carry around with me and use easily for the purpose of web browsing, email, all the kind of general stuff I know, using Craft, which we're going to be talking about today. There's no discernible difference between them. They're all running probably single core and just doing fine. Mm-hmm. It's only when you like heat up the heavy duty software that you notice a difference.
Right. Which I think most people who are shopping for a MacBook Air, they're not doing that often. And even when they do, like you said, it's still got the job done. It just takes a little bit longer. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm curious about your take on this. A lot of the reviews I've watched and read and all these sorts of things, they talk about this, right? They talk about, like it does warm up, it does throttle eventually. And I wonder if, to a degree, the coverage of that is it's not Apple's fault, but it was kind of inevitable because Apple Silicon is so good that now you can get a MacBook Air and you can do 4K video on it really easily. And so it draws the comparison where maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we wouldn't necessarily even think about those types of workflows when it comes to the MacBook Air. And I think that's just like an interesting place that this product line is in. And I think if you're out there looking for one of these, unless you're doing those sorts of workflows every day, I think it's totally fine to like have the understanding, like, if I really push it, it's going to throttle some. But like you said, the day-to-day, the stuff you're doing, the bread and butter type tasks that most Mac users do most of the time, it really seems like a fantastic machine.
Yeah. I mean, like my MacBook Pro, the one I own, the 16-inch, I don't remember how much I paid for it, but I think it was in the neighborhood of like $4,000. It was a lot of money. It's got a big hard drive. It's got a lot of memory and RAM. And when I put it next to this one, I can't tell a difference in terms of speed, except when I get into production work. I mean, which makes sense. I was thinking about these computers, like this build that I have here, 1 terabyte plus 16 gigabytes. I think it's about a $1,700 build by the time you're done.
Yeah.
And the MacBook M1 MacBook Air, you can now buy $999. But again, I don't want the entry level. I don't recommend that entry level build for almost anyone. Maybe I'm just a expensive money spending jerk. But when people buy a Mac, I really, even just sending your kid off to college, I recommend upping the storage and the RAM a bit because I just feel like it gets so much more life out of it.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. I mean, if you're going to spend the money on something long term, I think it makes sense in a world where you can no longer crack these things open and upgrade them yourselves, right? I mean, 10 years ago, I think my advice was, and I'm sure yours was too, of like, you can start a little bit lower down the option tree. And hey, if you're going to keep it 6 years, 3 years in, maybe upgrade the RAM or put a bigger hard drive in it if it becomes an issue. But those options are gone now. I mean, everything is the board, right? And I think in particular with the MacBook Air, there's a little bit of a sticking point there because it starts at that $1,199 price point. I wish that they could have gotten the M2 down to $999 starting. Because, I mean, really, I think the way to think about the M2 MacBook Air is that it's a $1,400 machine or a $1,500 machine, not that it's $1,000. Because you do want to get above that base storage. You do want to get above that base 8 gigabytes of memory. And that kind of stinks, but I think if you're buying something for the long term, it's a pretty good investment.
Yeah, and we're Mac Power users.
Sure.
You're listening to this show, you're a Mac Power user. So Apple has a $9.99 machine in the store because there's a ton of people that come in and say, I need a MacBook. What's the cheapest one? If it's under $1,000, they're more willing to get their credit card out.
Yes.
And they sell a lot of computers that way. And the people who get those computers are generally happy with them, but they do not have as long of a life, and they do have a certain amount of pain associated with them. But the people that listen to this show are looking to get the most out of their computer. So I view the M1 MacBook Air really, I mean, I don't even know if you can spec it up at this point. Can you just get the basic one, or do they let you increase the storage and memory on it?
I think it basically exists as it did, where you can go in and upgrade it.
Okay, so what I would say is that the MacBook M1 MacBook Air is basically a $1,200 computer.
Yeah.
Right? To get one that you want, it's about a $1,200 computer. I think the M2 MacBook Air is a $1,500 to $1,700 computer to get one you want.
Mm-hmm.
And the MacBook Pro starts around $2,200, I think, by the time you get what you want. And that, to make a long, to kind of get back to your original question, I feel like these reviewers are kind of subconsciously incorporating that, saying, well, this is halfway between the M1 and the M1 Pro. So I want to test it against it. And it doesn't hold up well on these stress tests. But I also don't think that's really what it's for.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing to contend with, like if you're purchasing one of these, I mean, here at the end of the summer, right? This is when a lot of consumer notebooks get sold. This is why this is out in the summer. People going back to school. The other thing to remember too is like the M1 MacBook Air is on Apple's refurbished store, and you may be able to find something that you can spec up higher than you would otherwise because of the discount that you get being refurbished. There's also educational discounts. Like there are lots of ways to get into the MacBook Air. And I think if you're coming from an Intel MacBook Air, which I mean, most people aren't going to go from an M1 to an M2, right? The vast majority of people buying one of these are going to be coming from an Intel Mac or no Mac at all. And while the M2 Air seems really awesome, and the one that we ordered is coming in on Friday, so I'll have it by the time this show posts, but I don't have it right now. I think that like the M1 Air is still a totally viable machine if that's like budget wise where you need to be, but the M2 is a lot nicer, and if you can swing it, I think you go for it.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? And I get that it's not going to keep up with this 14 that I'm about to part with, but that's okay. And I think the price is about right for me. Like that's what I'm willing to spend to have an extra computer that can always be around if the main one goes down for some reason, that I can take with me. And I know it sounds silly, but I just don't like carrying this really expensive, heavy computer with me when I leave the house. This is mainly an around the house, desktop class computer. And, we all spend money on dumb things. And I think I'm going to spend some money on this dumb thing, which will be a second Mac. And I don't know. A couple of observations. The sound is fine. Somebody wrote me and said, well, what about the speakers? There's no speaker grill. I'm like, don't worry about it. It sounds fine. It does not sound as good as a MacBook Pro, but I don't think it ever was meant to, but it sounds fine.
No. And the MacBook Pro sounds so good. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
It's sort of silly how good the speakers are on the 14-inch, and I imagine it's even better on the 16.
Yeah, agreed. And and you could get, and the other thing is the screen brightness. Somebody wrote me asking, because I've been talking about this in the labs. So somebody wrote me asking about the screen brightness. I don't have the brightness turned up to 100%. I've got it at about 75%, and it's plenty bright. And then the other question is, well, why wouldn't you just spend another $500 and just get kind of a decently spec'd 14-inch?
Mm-hmm.
And then if your main one goes down, then you've got something that can really do production work, not just kind of this toy. But honestly, I don't want the weight. I don't want, it's like another thing around your neck. I feel like I have a very nice MacBook Pro. It seems obsessive to have two of them, but I think the MacBook Air is probably the right one, but I still have to make some decisions. You have to make some decisions. We're going to talk at the end of the show.
That's right. Yeah. We'll get to that, but I'm surprised you were able to walk in the store and snag one. So I looked, And of course, my Apple Store is a small Apple Store. We're in a small market. So all they had on launch day were the base, just like bone stock configurations. The one I ordered, which will be my wife's machine, and her M1 Air is going to go to the kids for their homework school machine, because that's on the Intel MacBook Air, which I used last night. I was like, wow, this computer is angry. Like, fans going full tilt, the keyboard's bad. Sad how quickly that one fell from grace. But I ordered her a silver one with the base CPU, GPU, but with 2 terabytes of storage, and I ended up going 24 gigabytes of memory. I was going to do 16, but again, the longevity conversation we just had, I am after this, I'm done with like computers for family members for a long time. I always, in the back of my mind, knew when I bought her the M1 Air that whatever came out next would end up being her sort of longer term machine. And really, she could use anything. She uses her MacBook Air, honestly, probably like a lot of people in our audience with a laptop. It's tucked behind a display most of the time. Like, I don't know the last time she actually pulled it out. So I think I could swap them out, and I wonder how long it would take her to notice that it was like a physically different computer. Maybe I should try that. That's mean.
That would be funny.
But thank you for your impressions. I've been enjoying the lab content about it, and it's such an interesting machine, right? Like, I've been thinking about this too, and then we can move on. And we actually have a big topic to talk about today. But the last thing on my mind about this has made me think a lot about when the 24-inch iMac came out, the colorful iMac with the M1.
Yeah.
And how a lot of us, we were just obsessed over it for a long time because it was a redesign built around Apple Silicon, right? They got rid of all the stuff they needed for Intel iMacs, and this is what an iMac looks like now. And the MacBook Pros did it, but now the MacBook Air has done it. And Apple said at WWDC, the MacBook Air is the most popular Mac. It's the most popular selling laptop in the world. There are more MacBook Airs than any other Macs. And so anytime they do anything with that, especially after their history of basically canceling it, but not really canceling it, and then bringing it back in 2018, like, it's just so good to see them lean back into this model. And I think that's why it's so interesting. Even if the MacBook Air ultimately isn't for me or for you or for a bunch of people in our audience, it's still a really important machine to consider when thinking about the Mac ecosystem on a whole. So that's why we keep talking about it. Anytime they redesign something, especially something so popular, it's worth taking some time and trying to understand.
Yeah. And, all these reviews, I feel like, just to kind of close the loop on this review thing, I feel like it's a lot of people saying, this Toyota Prius can't run the Daytona 500 and I'm mad, and it's not meant to. And the sad thing is it can run. It just will run slow, but it actually could get on the track. I have been rendering video with it. One thought for me was, what if something happens to the 16-inch? I make my living making content. I need something that can render a video. And you know what? It could. And like, if I go on vacation and end up keeping this one, I could get some work done and make some labs content and make some YouTube stuff. I can make stuff on this one. If I wouldn't want to do it every day, but for a week, I could definitely get by with it. So it is, it's not really fair to compare it to them, because one, they're just two very different animals, and you want thinner light or you want powerful, and Apple has given you options of both. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Head over to 1password.com/MPU in all caps to get 20% off, and let them know you heard about it here on the Mac Power Users. We've talked about 1Password a lot on the show over the years, and the way that it can manage your passwords for you and create strong and unique passwords for each website or service you use. It's a way to protect you from the internet, and it's just a great app for that. And one of the features I've talked about that I want to focus on today is the idea of these secure notes. So in addition to managing all your passwords and credit cards and everything for you, dealing with the web with 1Password, they also have in their vault an area called secure notes. And these are like Apple Notes, but they're behind the 1Password secure vault. So that means if someone gets your phone and they manage to unlock it, they still can't get access to that secure vault data. Now, in the past, I've kept medical data in there, like medications and doctor information, stuff that I don't really want people just being able to see. And recently, I decided to fix that up. So I went into the 1Password Secure Vault and I combined a bunch of data into them. And I spent, I don't know, like an hour in the Secure Vault updating data. And I didn't realize just how powerful it has got over the years. Like one of the things it does is it has a markdown interpreter in it. So I was able to use headings. Heading 1 is 1 hash, heading 2 is 2 hashes, and totally clean up all my medical data in the Secure Vault. So now when I'm sitting in the doctor's office, I can very easily get to it. And that's the thing I like about having it in 1Password, because it's on my iPhone, my iPad, my Mac at all times. And 1Password always uses those authentication methods. Like on the phone, it uses my Face ID. So it's no more difficult to get to the data quickly when I'm in front of the doctor, but it's way more secure. And because I put everything in Markdown, it's really easy to read and review. And I can go through and annotate it and add to it. I was just really impressed with how far it's come, because when I first started using Secure Vaults long ago, it was just like a text file, but now it's so much more. And I've moved even more data into the Secure Vault now because of that. I just know that I have things I want to keep private that I keep right in there, and it's great. So not only do I have my medical data in there, I have medical data from my family. I have financial stuff like account numbers and social security numbers. Another thing I use it for is I put in the login data and credentials for other people. Like a lot of family members want me to fix stuff at their house. And whenever I set their Wi-Fi password or whatever, I just save it to a secure note in 1Password. And once in a while, they end up calling me to ask me for it. But that gives me an easy way to keep it without junking up my own 1Password data with a bunch of their stuff. But I just really like the secure notes. If you're not using that feature and you have 1Password, I strongly recommend it. If you're not using 1Password, that's a really good reason to use 1Password, is to have those secure notes. Either way, check it out. Go to 1password.com/MPU in all caps. Once again, that all caps gets you that 20% off. Check it out. Let them know you heard about it from us. And thank you, 1Password, for all of your support of the Mac Power users. Okay, we actually have a topic today, Stephen. Sorry, gang. We kind of went long on that first segment. But either way, I have been using Craft. Stephen has been using Craft. We've been hearing from listeners that are using Craft, and we decided it's time for a deep dive on Craft. So here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, Craft is such an interesting application to me. Sort of broadly, it fits into the note-taking application space, but it also has a lot of characteristics of more of the personal knowledge management type apps like Obsidian and Roam. It kind of has a foot in both of those worlds. You can totally use Craft like you do Apple Notes or Bear or something like that. But then it also has all these other features that are ready to take it to the next level. And I think that's one reason both of us like Craft so much, is that you can kind of use it how you want, and it's really forgiving about that sort of thing. And I think they've done a really good job at bringing a lot of really powerful features into an app that on the surface of it is still really simple to use.
Yeah. I mean, so Craft's been out now, I guess, about a year and a half.
Something
I want
like
to
that.
say. And so we always get asked to do, deep dives on new and interesting apps. And I'm actually kind of conservative about it, because I feel like if we're going to give a full show to an application, and we're going to be telling our listeners that this is something they want to try, and this is definitely what we're recommending today, is that you're going to want to try Craft. I don't want it to be an app that is just out of the gate and you don't know if they're going to support it. You don't know what the long-term plan is. Like you'll note that we almost never do deep dives on apps that don't have a monetization plan, because I don't believe in recommending apps that don't have a future. And Craft really has made that test. I feel like they've got to a point now, because I've been using Craft, and it's remarkable to me how often they're doing updates to the app, and they seem to be very responsive. And I feel like it's kind of matured to a place where we can now really give the MPU seal of approval to it. And it is, like Stephen said, it's like a hybrid thing between Apple Notes and Obsidian. It's got PKM elements, but it really feels to me like it's primarily aimed at Apple Notes, but it does have backlinks and other things in it. So it's a very interesting app. And there's a lot to it. Like people use Craft for their own individual stuff. People use it for sharing. I'm running a big piece of the team management for Max Sparky through Craft, and we want to kind of get into it today. So to start, you can get the app at craft.do, and it is it's a paid for application. You can get it for free with up to 1 gigabyte of storage or 1,000 what they call blocks. But if you use it seriously, you're very quickly going to hit that. And beyond that, it's $5 a month for 50 gigabytes of storage and up to 5 collaborators. That's what I'm doing. I pay annually for it, and I'm going to, probably be right in the middle of that. I feel like I've already got 5 people installed on my Craft, but in terms of data usage, I'm going to be right in the sweet spot there.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go bigger with your business, it's $10 per person with a 180-day version history and some additional tools. And it's like a lot of these apps, they say, if you're enterprise, call us. I don't know what that means, I don't ever want to buy an app where I have to call them to get the price.
Nope. That's, if you have to ask, you can't afford it kind of situation.
Yeah.
One thing that's really cool about Craft, and I'm sure we're going to touch on this a bunch, is that it's really nicely designed. It is on the iPhone, iPad, Mac, and there's a web version as well. And really notably, and we've touched on this before when talking about Mac Catalyst, but the Mac app is a Catalyst app. And I think, like, hand on heart, it's the best Mac Catalyst app I've ever come across.
Yeah.
I have a couple of niggles about the editor, which we'll get to, but overall it feels and looks and works like a Mac, like a, quote unquote Mac app. And I think that's one reason they've been able to iterate so quickly on it. I mean, there are updates to this thing all the time. And I don't know this, but I would imagine, knowing what I know about software development, that having basically one code base that runs across all 3, iPhone, iPad, and Mac, makes it much easier to do that. And it means that when the iPhone and iPad version gets something, the Mac version gets it as well. And that's definitely not the case for everything, right? In this category specifically, usually it's the other way around. Usually the Mac version is the best version, and the iPhone and iPad version maybe aren't as good or are limited somehow in unusual ways. And I really like Craft's approach, and they can do this because they're new. But it's like, hey, we're going to treat all these platforms the same, and I really like that. And I think that using Mac Catalyst to do it was clearly the right call, because they've really been able to push this forward rapidly and in a way that I think has really benefited their users. Being, like you said, they are very tuned in with what their listeners want and need, and they've been able to iterate quickly. And I would imagine this decision has really paid off for them.
Yeah. In fact, let's just go off script a little bit here and just talk about how responsive Craft is to the users, because they had a Slack and now they've just opened a Circle, and they are constantly in contact with the users, and I hate to use the word influencers about software. When I first started looking at Craft after it first launched, and they sent me a free license for the first year, but for the second year I paid for mine. Full disclosure, I had a year free. But I started writing them, and I got responses back from people far up the food chain. And one of the most interesting things to me was, at the time I was still a lawyer, and I had asked, what is your plan for end-to-end encryption? End-to-end encryption is that thing where you put your own password, your data gets encrypted basically locally, and even if somebody subpoenas their servers, they can't unencrypt it. They don't have the ability to do it. Like Obsidian has this, Day One has this, DevonThink has this. So there's several apps where you can encrypt it locally, and then you have what's called end-to-end encryption. And they wrote me back and they said, yeah, we thought about that, but we have a lot on our plate right now, and that's not on the roadmap for this foreseeable future. And what I liked about that was, first of all, it's too bad because I like end-to-end encryption, but I like that they were honest with me. You know how many developers I've written about with questions like that, and they say, oh yeah, we're definitely going to do that. And then they never do that.
Yeah.
I've
been arguing with the Things guys for years over a certain feature they keep saying is coming. So I understand.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been so easy for them just to tell me, oh yeah, we're definitely working on that. And then I would have been more likely to talk about their app and And I kind of went quiet on craft for a while because I didn't want to recommend something without end to end. And today I'm telling you right now, if you need to really keep something secure, if you've got client information, maybe you're doing your diary or something, I don't think craft is good for that because they don't have end to end encryption. But there's a lot of things it is good for. But I really appreciated that they were so honest with me about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cool.
Let's talk, because I think we got into the weeds too quick. For people who've never opened Craft, it's a notes app. Okay, so when you open it up, it's got the left bar where you can put folders and favorites and different bits of metadata and filters. And then on the right, you've got a notes app, just like Apple Notes, except it works on a kind of a block mentality. I mentioned blocks earlier. So Craft, every paragraph is in essence a block. And you can have a block and it recognizes markdown. So like you could put 2 hashes and it's a heading 2 block, or it could be text, or you could turn it into bullets, and everything's very pretty. And you've got these blocks as you go down the page. And the nice thing about that is you can move the blocks. So there's like handles so you can grab it. If you're writing something and you want to move paragraphs around, it's super easy. And the blocks over the last year and a half, like with every update, it seems like they get more advanced. Like they've got blocks that can turn into to-do lists. They've got a block that can turn into an outline with a folding disclosure triangle. So you can create an outline and everything works just like an outliner. They've got a block that turns into a table, and we're going to talk about that. You can also take any block and then turn that into a sub page where like you click on the block, and to imagine it visually, if you're looking at the outline or the document, you click it, there's an arrow on the right side, and you essentially go to the right of the existing block, and then you've got a whole new set of things in it. Like, for example, I have a craft document about woodworking, and there's one entry that says wish list, tool wish list. And if I click that, the whole document slides to the left, and then there's just one page with all of the tools that someday I'm going to buy. If I would stop buying Macs, I could afford them. And so it's got a very interesting way, and you can do multiple sub blocks, right? So if you want you could have one document that just keeps, shifting into more and more complex documents. So that's something that Apple Notes doesn't have. It has great support for multimedia generally. I mean, it's not, maybe we'll get into that later, but I feel like it's probably not as good as Apple Mail in the sense that Apple Mail is so baked into the operating system, but it does have support. Everything links, so you can create links. And like one of the beauties of this application is what they call deep links, which I don't know if that's the right name. It feels a little intense, right? If you're listening to deep link, but basically what it means is you can create a link to any block, not just a document, but to a block. So if I've got, let's just say I happen to have the Lee Valley scraper playing on a list. Okay. I could create a link to that very entry. And then I could, maybe at Christmas I could send it to my sister and say, boy, this would be a nice thing for me, mm-hmm. And so you can create these deep links that not only work within the application, but work outside the application. One of the main things I do with it is I have deep links that I link to OmniFocus tasks, where I've got a reference document in Craft relating to something, and I'll get the deep link out of it, and I can embed that into the task in OmniFocus, and then I've got a link right back to it. That's kind of an overview. We're going to get into more details in a minute, but you think that kind of gets the idea across about what this app is?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only thing I would add is that, and you touched on it, it does look really good. And Craft gives you a bunch of tools to dress up your documents where you can have backgrounds and you can bring in images from Unsplash and like on and on and on, where Apple Notes is more stripped down, right? Apple Notes is basically text. You can bring in images, but you can't set like the background of a note. You can't really, there's notes in, Apple Notes has tables, but they're pretty simple. Craft gives you more tools to lay out your information more visually. And so if that's the sort of note taking you like to do, Craft, I think, is better suited to it than Apple Notes is.
Yeah. And to go to the flip side, Obsidian, we're going to talk about in more detail later about comparing these things, but Obsidian has kind of more power tools. But Obsidian, although it has an iPhone and iPad app, they're barely iPhone and iPad apps. Whereas the Craft app, being Catalyst, it is gorgeous on all platforms and easy to manipulate and move through. So if you do a lot of work on iPad and iPhone, this is particularly an app you want to take a look at. Okay. That being said, you want to talk through about, so I think we've given a good overview. Let's talk through some of our favorite features of the app.
Yeah. Can we start with keyboard shortcuts? Because
Yes.
I love keyboard shortcuts, and Craft has a very deep set of them. We'll put a link in the show notes of their help document, but basically the entire interface you can manage from the keyboard. It's sweet.
Yeah. It's sort of. I mean, some of the things aren't quite there yet. I actually sounded off in the Craft Slack yesterday as I was working on the outline. One of the concepts of Craft, which I didn't mention earlier, is spaces. So with your Craft account, you can have multiple spaces. Like I have one that's myself, just personal space. Nobody else can see it. And I have one called Sparky Media, which is a shared space, which I share with JF and Liana and some of the team members. And so when anything I write in that space, like a lot of times when I'm working on blog posts or newsletters, they go into the Craft space, and then I can send that deep link out to the other team members and say, hey guys, I've got this. Could you take a look at it for me before I post it? And I can send it to them in Slack or text message. And since they've got Craft installed on their devices, that deep link works. So they just click on it, it goes straight to the page, and they're good. And so you've got a space where you've got everything shared in it, and you've got a space where it's not. So to kind of get back to the thing, there's not an easy way to really jump between spaces with keyboard shortcuts. If you hit the escape key, you can do it, but I would prefer to be a little better. But overall, yes, just about everything lends itself to keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah, and I have all my stuff in one space, so I had not come across that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're going to talk about sharing later because there are some interesting wrinkles to that. A thing I like about it is focus mode. This is one of the recent features. You hit Command plus period on any note. It gets rid of all the UI and just gives you a clean writing interface, which, is the thing a lot of us are looking for. Mm-hmm. And I really love it. It's a recently new feature, but, it's just another example of the way these guys keep showing up.
A feature that's sort of related to the keyboard shortcuts is the Command O, the open dialog.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to Command K in Slack or Discord. I think Obsidian has something like this as well.
Yeah, Command O in Obsidian too.
Yeah. It's kind of like Spotlight within the app, and you can just start typing and it will pull up anything you have for the terms. So I can start typing David, and any notes with your information in there comes up, and also get blocks. So if you are in a block inside a note, I can jump right to that. Yeah. And this is something that I wish Apple Notes would do. Apple Notes has search, but search and a really useful open palette are different things. And I think the open palette's the way to go.
Yeah. So Command O is your friend because it allows you to just jump to whatever you want. And that, I think, is the most useful shortcut in the whole app. Like Steven said, you can also jump to individual blocks. So if you've got a block, and just to go back to the woodworking one, if I say, Command O hand tools, it'll offer me the ability to jump to the exact hand tool heading in that document from anywhere in my database. So there's no faster way to move around, but it does have folders and traditional things, traditional organizational methods, except for it does not have tags. Another thing I really like is the shortcuts support. It's native player. Of course, it's on all the Apple platforms. This is a Mac app. It's Catalyst based, but it's a Mac app, and on the iPad, it feels like an iPad app. And of course, they have shortcuts.
Yeah, they've got shortcuts for adding to a document, creating a document, and then opening specific sections in the application. So I feel like they've got it pretty well covered. I was trying to think about things I would want from a shortcut that Craft doesn't offer, and they actually didn't come up with anything super compelling. Is there anything here that you would want them to add?
Yeah, I would like the append and prepend stuff. I'd like them to take a look at what Drafts is doing and copy all of that. You
Okay.
know, um,
Sorry, Greg.
yeah. Well, I mean, Drafts works with this app. In fact,
Yeah.
this is not a replacement for Drafts, but I would like it like. For instance, I'd like it to go and pull a deep link out of a document for me and allow me to embed it in an OmniFocus project. There's definitely more I have. I feel like they've got good support, but not great support for shortcuts. But, in comparison with the other apps out there, they have shortcut support, you know what I mean? And it's useful actions. So, yeah, it's good, but it definitely can be better.
One more feature I really like is its ability to inline calculations and unit conversions. And so if you just have text within a note or within a block, you can highlight it and it will show you the answer. So if you had 15 times 30, and then you can actually click the answer and it will swap it in the document. So you can, it's kind of like, it's not too dissimilar to Solver in a way where you can do kind of written out math problems or unit conversions in a note, and then Craft will take care of it for you from there. And definitely not something Apple Notes has, but something that is surprisingly useful. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build your brand and grow your business online. You can stand out with a beautiful website, engage your audience with really cool newsletter tools, and sell your products, virtual or physical, all in one place. Squarespace has you covered no matter what you need for your website. With Squarespace, you get to use their really cool analytics tools so you can see what pages are performing well, what products are doing well, how people are finding you. And armed with that information, you can make better decisions about your website. You get started with this best-in-class website template and you customize it to fit your needs. So you pick colors and add your logo, change the typefaces. You can really make a Squarespace site your own. It's incredible what you can build with their tools. And you don't have to build just a website. You can have a blog, you can host a portfolio, anything you need, Squarespace is ready to go. I love building on Squarespace because they have all those tools. I don't have to put things together from different systems and worry about plugins and all that other stuff. Squarespace is all in one place, and it's a great way to build a website. Head to squarespace.com/MPU for a free trial with no credit card required. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MPU at checkout. That'll get you 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain name. Once again, that's squarespace.com/MPU and the code MPU for 10% off. That also shows Squarespace that you came from us. Our thanks to Squarespace for their support of the show and Relay FM.
All right. We mentioned earlier that Craft has this great update system. And by update system, I mean they put out a lot of updates. It feels to me almost weekly. I haven't really tracked it, but it's often that I'm getting emails from Team Craft. As we record this, we just got a new update the day before. Some of the things that they added daily notes already. And daily notes is a big thing for PKM people. Rome does it, Obsidian does it, now Craft does it, where it gives you a note per day. And so they keep adding to that where you can now easily add notes to it. Like if I have a call with Steven about something, I can add the notes from that call to my daily note and kind of log it. They're increasing task handling. The editor's getting better, and they're already getting this Craft extension program going. In fact, you want to talk about that for a minute, the extensions?
Yeah. So this was announced a while back, and it's rolled out, but it's there are not a ton of options yet. We'll have some links in the show notes. You can explore it more. But basically, this was a way to connect other applications and other services to Craft and be able to pass information in and out of that of those applications. And there are a few of them floating around. There's a website called craftery.io, and they have several options. Like there's one that basically you can create and link tasks in Craft with Todoist, which is something I know like the guys at Mac Stories do with Obsidian.
Yeah.
There's another extension that adds like a fancier date picker to the application. It's extending what Craft can do. And like I said, it's early days. But what I like about this in particular is that they announced this, I don't know, about a year into the application. And I think it speaks to the types of users that they have. Is that, yeah, people do want to do more at this. And they also know that they can't build it all themselves. And so by opening this, there's a developer site you can go and see how it all works. You can build your own if you want to. I mean, it's really cool. And it means that Craft can become a better citizen within your workflow if you're using some of these other tools.
Yeah. And like to compare with Obsidian, Obsidian is crazy with extensions. I mean, people have made like there's new ones every day and they are insanely powerful. Like Obsidian is a much better app because of their extension framework. And I don't think Craft can hold a candle to what they're doing. I'm not sure they ever will be able to because of the way Obsidian works. You know, it's just a folder full of markdown files. So it's so easy to make all sorts of interesting extensions. That being said, given that this is a bit of a walled garden, I have been running Craft extensions. And so we've got, it only works on the Mac currently, and you've got to enable it under the preferences under the advanced tab. And then you've got to go on the internet and download some of them and install them. Like I use the extension with OmniFocus where I can just take a list of blocks in OmniFocus and turn it into, in Craft and turn it into an OmniFocus project. I also do a lot of writing in IA Writer. I've been kicking the tires on that one lately, and there's an extension for that. So I could take my writing out of Craft and dump it into IA Writer if I wanted. There's one that automatically generates a table of contents on your page based on heading levels, which I like.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, they've got one that is kind of like a template system where you can take a collection of blocks. Like, let's say we're going to do I like for a labs video, I've got the links, the description. I've got certain things I do in every video note. I can save those and then just click a button to insert them in future blocks. So there's already some useful extensions, and getting them installed isn't that difficult. You enable extensions, you download them, and then you install it from inside the app. And I can see where this is going to be useful. I don't think it's ever going to be what the beautiful chaos that is Obsidian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very different. And Obsidian has, I mean, you said it with Markdown, kind of a more inherent flexibility to it anyways.
Yeah.
But for common things that like Mac users want to do, like things, and there a bunch of big name Mac apps are supported in this, either officially or by third parties.
Yeah, so we get a lot of updates, and I think it will only be a question of time before the extension thing gets fully launched, and we see a lot of interesting extensions showing up.
Yeah. I want to talk some about data portability. This is always an issue when we talk about these sorts of apps. And something like Obsidian, plain Markdown, that's fantastic because you can just point that folder at anything and all your text is there. But Craft, it is running its own system. They have their own sync engine. You're in their garden. But I think they've done a pretty good job at importing and exporting. So on the import side, you can bring in content that is in Markdown or in the text bundle format. And they have a support document that outlines, okay, if you're in Apple Notes and you want Markdown of your notes, this is how you do it, because Apple doesn't, of course, have an exporter from Apple Notes. You can import a total of 2,000 notes. Can't imagine that's an issue for many people. But if you're coming from a folder of Markdown and you want to move into Craft, you can do that.
Yeah, and the export side is equally sunny. They make it easy to get your data out. We'll put a blog post in by the chief developer talking about their view of, how your data is your data and we want to make sure you always have access to it. And I don't have as much data in this app as some folks, but I was talking to Tim Stringer from Learn OmniFocus before we recorded today's show, and he was telling me how he exported his entire Craft database into Obsidian just for a test, and he said it worked fine. I mean, obviously, some of the rich metadata or the photos and some of that stuff doesn't go to Obsidian that easily because Obsidian's not. It does it, but it's not really made for that. But in terms of getting the markdown files out and putting them somewhere else, he said it wasn't a problem. And I haven't done enough tests on this, but everyone I've talked to in terms of data export seems to be happy with it. It's not like a Evernote situation where you put your data in and it's quite difficult to get it out.
Yeah. I mean, they offer Markdown and text bundle as export options, PDF, Word, Excel, and they say in the support document they are planning on bringing support for HTML, rich text, and plain text export as well. And I think what's especially cool about their export side is that with this block editor, it is more than just plain text. I mean, you can just have text in a document, but if you do something that looks really nice with a background and images and tables and everything, getting a nice PDF out of that or getting a Word document out of that, like that's nice. It plays into Craft's strengths to have these other export options. So I think they've done a good job there. Definitely better than the old Evernote days where you got like weirdo HTML files at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say I shouldn't pull Evernote over the coals here. I haven't tried it recently, but the last time I tried to export from Evernote, which was admittedly a while ago, it was difficult. Maybe they fixed it, but that's always been like a challenge.
Definitely.
And even this app, when they first launched, I felt like the export wasn't great. Like I tried to write a couple blog posts in it in the first couple of weeks it launched, and getting the text out and into WordPress or Squarespace was difficult. And whereas now they've, among those updates, they've got a tool now where you can select text and say export as Markdown, and it gives you a very clean, non-garbage laden Markdown text. And then I just dump that into WordPress or Squarespace, and I'm off to the races. It is trivial now to get your rich text out of it as Markdown. They've fixed that. Let's talk about, we talked a little about the layout tools, but we haven't kind of gone into all the ways you can use it. Like you can make blocks, like you can have a block that turns into a literal block. I mean, I just, every time I open the app, I find a new way to modify and display the text. And I really find that kind of delightful.
Yeah, it comes with a bunch of really cool presets. So if you just want your note like on a blue background and have a nice image at the top, you can do that with their preset page styles.
Yeah.
You can even customize and pick your own color, pick your own gradient, etc. You can also utilize their templating system. And so with this, you can create your own templates, but there's also a huge library of templates that the craft team has put together. Everything from a travel wish list to you want to make an apartment listing through like charts of chores or subscription tracking, all sorts of different things. And you can go in and plug your own stuff into these templates. It reminds me, and I say this meaning it as praise, it reminds me of the early days of iWork, like Pages and Keynote and stuff, where that was such a strong feature in the early days of iWork, like these really nice looking templates you could use because nothing else really had them at that point that were this nice. And you can go in here and create these and save them as your own templates. And you can really make something that looks really nice really pretty quickly. And if you're sharing it, which we're going to talk more about the sharing collaboration later, or if you're publishing it to the web, something else we're going to talk about later, you can really dress something up in a way you're not spending a ton of time putting this together. You're not spending, 3 days like very carefully moving the blocks around and making sure it's all lined up. Like their tools are built where if you want something more visual, you can make these cards and blocks and tables and everything work together pretty seamlessly.
I hadn't thought about the iWork similarity, but I would even go further back to AppleWorks. I almost feel like it's got kind of that vibe to it where you can kind of make of it what you want. And this is, I mean, obviously it's been updated for the modern era of the web, but it does kind of have that kind of unleashed feel where you can turn, like, people are using this to make web pages, but people are also making it to run their lives. And it does both okay, you know? One thing I mentioned earlier was the daily notes. That wasn't a launch feature, but is an existing feature in PKM apps. It is popular, like I said earlier, and I think their daily note works great. It has a calendar, and you just click on any date, and you can go to the daily note. So if you wanted to use it to do some basic task management, and you say like next Tuesday, prepare the Mac Power Users outline or whatever, you could add it to next Tuesday. And when you got there, it would already be on the date for you. It's very accessible to anybody that wants to use it. The only caveat there is I would not treat this as a journaling tool because it is not end-to-end encrypted, like I talked about earlier in the show. But
Right.
I mean, if you don't care about that and you want to do your journaling there, you could do it there as well.
One thing I like about the daily note is that they're separate from your regular notes. So in that left-hand sidebar, the first segment of control is your regular documents, and then the calendar and daily notes are the second one.
Yeah.
And so you can really kind of focus on the type of thing you're looking at. And I think the daily notes thing is really nice. I like having the calendar, and you can also scroll in that sidebar, and like the calendar keeps up with you. And it does the thing that day one does and other apps do, that if you scroll to a month with content and those dates, those days are highlighted, and you click on them and you go right to that entry. I think it's really well done. And everything in the daily notes, as far as how they look and how they work, is the same as your regular document. So you have all those layout tools, you have tasks and blocks and cards and background images, everything else in both your regular notes and the daily tasks, or in the list note thing. So I think that's pretty sweet. You can treat them the same way.
Yeah. And like a good use for this to me would be not necessarily your deepest thoughts that you would want to put in an encrypted diary, but maybe you just want to log your day. Like, today I worked on this project and that project, and, called the landlord or whatever. Like, if you want to like log stuff, daily note would be great for that. And with the way this application can link, you could even, create direct links to related documents in your Craft database.
Mm-hmm.
So people are using Craft in so many different ways. I was looking online at some of the folks. One guy put together what you call a life dashboard. And I've seen this in a lot of different contexts. The first person I ever saw do this was August Bradley, who has been a guest on our show. He did it through Notion. I've been doing something like this in Obsidian for a long time. I call it Sparky OS, my personal operating system. But people can do stuff like that in Craft as well. But at the same time, people are running whole teams. Like, one of the blog posts I found was a team that put together a Kanban board in Craft. And while granted, it's not really made for that, they seem to be able to pull it off okay. Personally, we're going to talk about how we're using the application later in the show, but I can tell you one example for me is we did a trip. I put all the travel stuff on that and sent the link out to my family members so they could, keep up with where I was staying and what was going on. There's a lot you can do with this app. I mean, it like I said, because of the sharing, it is a PKM, but it's also a web publishing platform. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by SourceGraph. Go to about.sourcegraph.com to get universal code search and move fast even in big code bases. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but now you have to get them onboarded. If your company is growing, onboarding new developers will be a common occurrence, but it's a big undertaking each time. One of the biggest challenges for new hires is to get up to speed with the project their team is working on. This can be tricky if the code bases your developers are working in are already large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization is helpful, but given the fact that most companies store knowledge in at least 2 different locations, how do you make knowledge accessible to those that need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their own learning over time and in different situations. Teams without SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues or reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. But with SourceGraph, every developer can search across millions of repositories to find specific code, saving time for themselves and everyone else. So when questions do come up, it's the big stuff that's worthy of the extra time. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier, and today they work with leading companies across every industry, including 3 out of 5 of the top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. So visit about.sourcegraph.com to learn more. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Or click the link in the show notes to let them know you heard about it from us. Our thanks again to SourceGraph for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM.
Yeah, so that's one of the neat features with Craft is that you can use it as a web page builder. In fact, the links in the show notes, the dashboard document and the Kanban document, those are Craft pages published to the web, and it is it's really cool. You get a lot of options around it. So you have your document that you've made with all of your images and all your text and everything, and then you can hit the share button, and you can share to web, and it gives you a URL. It also gives you a QR code, so you could print that QR code and put it somewhere and people could scan it. But you get a lot of control over who can access this web page. And so you can set a password up to view it. So if you have something that's a little sensitive, you can password protect it. You can also set an expiration date there that just after the certain point, it's not published anymore. And then you can allow or disallow comments and search engine indexing. And I actually used this about a year ago. I was working on a project for my church, and I was kind of the project manager keeping up with all the different pieces, and I kept it all in Craft, and everyone had the link, and I had comments turned on. So people could go in and comment on the page when something was done or if they had questions, and then I could update the document. It's kind of like I used it at least as like a one-way Google Doc sort of, but you can also use all these layout tools and make something that looks really nice and publish it as a little website.
Yeah. I was just thinking with the Indoor Studios build, maybe I just should set up a Craft page for the Labs members and just put it on a password, and they can see the daily pictures and stuff, and that would be so easy. I mean, you literally just load it into Craft and push a button and it's published. I mean, there can't be a much easier workflow for something. I'm not sure I would put my big company on a Craft page, or,
No.
I wouldn't use it for like high traffic items or things, but like just for like sharing amongst your team or family members, I think it would be fine. Right now, I'm in the middle of the webinar series for the Shortcuts for Mac Field Guide. I had that Plus edition this year, so some people bought that and they're getting a webinar series from me. Well, I've got that document broken to pieces in Craft, all the outlines for those webinars, and I'm sharing them because some of them have guests, and I'm just publishing it through Craft and sharing a link, and then they can comment on it, and it works fine for that. I mean, there are a lot of, once you kind of understand how that works, you can find a lot of day-to-day uses for it.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to look at it. Is something sort of you want to share on a temporary basis, right? Because some of this goes against like the tenets of good web publishing, where, like, you don't own the URL, you don't own the server. I mean, if Craft were to go away, like, your notes would obviously be a bigger concern than any web pages you have published.
Yeah.
But for something sort of quick and like you already have all the content in Craft, it's just a really nice way to extend Craft to other people without doing the full-blown collaboration song and dance.
Yeah.
And like, it's obviously not something Apple Notes offers, but I think it's something that like is actually pretty useful. I mean, we were thinking of some other examples, and like one that I thought of is like if you're planning a family trip, like this weekend I'm going with family, we're going canoeing and camping for the weekend. Like, I could build out a Craft page with like, this is the link on Google Maps, this is where we're going, these are the times, this is the information for the cabin, and on and on. Of course, I didn't, and it's all just in an iMessage thread. But like, those are the sorts of uses that I think of once you sort of get your head around like things that come up where you need to share information kind of one way, craft really is about the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk. So that's internet sharing of a craft page. I want to talk a little bit about collaboration on a space level. I talked earlier in the show how I've got the Sparky Media Space. And in that, I've got a series of subfolders. It's got like ideas for things I may want to make. It's got the newsletter text, blog posts. It's got project pages for some of the videos I'm doing in the Mac Sparky Labs. And it's stuff, I do have people helping me with some of this stuff, and they need to see the links and they need to see the draft text and all that. And I looked at different options for that. I looked at, like trying to do it through Google Docs, and, I tried to look at, maybe Basecamp and various solutions. And ultimately I landed on Craft about 2 months ago. And that's really the reason we're making the show today, is because I'm using it daily now. And I realize that this is so good. And, but the way the space works, when you have a shared space, it has, anybody in the space has access to everything. All right. That's in comparison to something like Google Docs, where you can share on a document by document basis. So the shared spaces are good as long as you're okay with making sure everybody can see everything.
Right. And I think that depends on your organization and how you work. I mean,
yeah,
the way I thought about this, and this is a weird analogy, but stick with me for a second. It made me think about 1Password vaults. It's like, at Relay, we have 3. Like, I've got a personal one. We have one that's just me and Mike, and then we have one that we share with some other team members, right? So, like, the bank login is only in the one that Mike and I see, but the Twitter one is one where everyone who's in that vault can see. And so you have to kind of think about that. It's just a different way of doing it, and I don't think I have strong feelings either way. You just have to be aware of how it works.
No, you just need to understand that. Like, for my small team, this is actually ideal. I want everybody to be able to see everything. Somebody who's helping me with illustrations gave me really good feedback on the newsletter, right? And so it just, that's good. But, in some teams, it could be a problem. But just be aware. I would like to see them add a feature that allows me to just share a document. Like, with going back to those webinar series, I'm publishing it and allowing the guest to comment on it. But I'd like to give the guests kind of a Google Docs experience where they could go in and actually edit it rather than just in comments. But I can't do that without giving them access to the entire space. And they're just a guest on a webinar. I don't really want to give them full access. So there are areas where I think that could improve. But once again, this is a relatively new app, and I think they're working pretty hard. Are there other areas where you would like to see Craft, like where it's not quite right for you, or things you'd like to see them change?
The biggest one for me, and it's a pretty big sticking point, is the lack of offline support for attachments. I've spoken to them about this, and it's like, last I heard from them, it was on the roadmap. Take travel, for instance, where I'm going to have a PDF of, plane tickets, maybe tickets to an event, something like that. I want those accessible to me offline. So I keep all that stuff in Apple Notes, because Apple Notes has everything available to you offline at all times. It downloads everything locally. And I wish Craft had that.
And it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Yeah. To me, end-to-end encryption, I'd love to see that become a priority. I think that would allow people to use it in a lot of ways. Another one is there's no support for tagging.
That one surprises me a little bit. I know they're really based around like the folder structure idea, but it seems like tagging is so common in these types of applications. I don't get it.
Yeah. But it's also, they are, Obsidian. I keep coming back to Obsidian because I use Obsidian a lot, and I use Craft now quite a bit too. And there are differences. And like Obsidian has more of an open feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's going to have tagging because that community is so fast, right?
Yeah.
If they didn't have tagging, then somebody would have added it. In fact, I think it kind of did work that way. So at some point, somebody was adding plugins, and then they eventually brought it into the app. Whereas the precious nature of Craft, the fact that it is so pretty and it is, made by a single developer, I just think it's a question of them getting there. And I don't think I don't think they have chosen to not add tagging. I feel like they just haven't got to tagging yet.
Yeah, in fact, they've said that it's on the roadmap, and they have this document about how to work around it in the meantime, which I think is cool. They're responsive to what people are saying about their application. They know people want this, and
Yeah.
so there are some ways to do it, kind of faking it. But they say it's coming, so I guess we'll see. And I imagine when they do it, it will be like everything else in this application. It's going to be nicely polished. I'm this is complete conjecture town, but I can see them like having in the right sidebar where you have all the properties of the document. Like maybe you have a tag cloud there. It's easy to organize them. They're in like a set place in the document. Like maybe it's all at the bottom or all at the top, like metadata. I think they'll do a good job of it. Like you said, they just haven't gotten to it yet. And it's hard to remember. It's hard to remember talking about this. This is still a relatively young app. And so
Yeah.
clearly it just wasn't towards the top of the list.
The like one of my initial complaints, one of my initial deal breakers, honestly, was the export wasn't as clean as I'd like it, and it felt too tedious. So I stopped using it for a lot of purposes, and they fixed that. That's no longer a complaint. It now does a great job of export. They've added tables, but they aren't particularly powerful. I think it's kind of a weak table implementation.
Yeah, it's better than it was in the beginning. In the beginning, after a certain length of table, you were like scrolling within the table. It's very strange. That's
Yeah.
all fixed. It's still a little clunky to make big tables, and my sort of critique of it is that there's no arithmetic within the tables. You have it within text blocks, like we said earlier. But if I just wanted to make a little like simple spreadsheet with some simple math in it, I can't do that. And hopefully that comes. I mean, it seems like it'd be really nice to have, I'm not asking for Google Sheets or Excel in here, but some basic arithmetic to build out some nice tables. So I could, keep a simple budget or keep track of a simple inventory within Craft would be pretty sweet.
Yeah, agreed. And I say this with confidence that I feel like a lot of this stuff is going to get solved. I mean, the reason we're giving this app a show is because I think that they're on the right path here. Like, I don't think any of these complaints are new to the team, and I suspect that, they're going to get a lot of this stuff fixed up.
Yeah. Another thing I would like to see them improve is the block editor itself. Again, it's gotten better, and the blocks do give you a lot of control. So like any block, like you said, can be linked to a sub page. Blocks can have their own formatting. You can use keyboard shortcuts like indent and outdent blocks. But say that you want to grab the text, all the text across a bunch of different blocks in a document. That's where it feels a little non-native, where you've got to like double click and then it sort of enters this mode where the blocks are kind of invisible for a second. You can grab all the text. I get why they do the block editing, especially on the iPhone and iPad. It makes it really easy to reorganize a document because you can just grab a little handle on the left-hand side of a block and like move it down and it rearranges and things flow back around. Like a lot of task managers have that where you can bring a to-do item up or down a list and it makes room as it goes. That's all really cool. And I don't want them to get rid of it, but I would like, at least on the Mac, for the blocks to become a little more in the background and be there when I want them to be there. But if I'm just working in a text-only document, I'd like them to downplay that part of the editor. And I'm not quite sure how the mechanics of that should or would work, but it does feel like sometimes I'm kind of like doing more clicking than I need to get something done if it was just sort of a simple text field as opposed to this layout tool, if you will.
That kind of like there's a problem that it's hard for me to verbalize. It's like the interface generally works great until it doesn't. Like once in a while, you want to do something and you just don't get the behavior you expect. And it is because of it being a block editor, I think, largely. And I get the same feeling sometimes with organization. Like I like the way it organizes, but like sometimes it seems a little tedious to try and get things you're like. Well, we haven't mentioned at all the way it displays your notes, but there's three views. There's one where they're adjustable size notes and they kind of put them together like a bento box on your screen, which is nice. and it usually arranges them by default by the most recent last, which makes it easy to go in and find, the recently edited notes. But it's a little chaotic for me, I have to admit. And then there's another view where all the boxes are the same size. So that's less chaotic. And then there's a list view, but the list view, I feel like they don't fully take advantage of it. I feel like the app itself could just use a little bit of rethinking about how it displays notes and, how you pull blocks together. And I'm not giving really particular advice because I'm not sure what I'm looking for, but I feel like it could get better. How's that for fuzzy?
No, I don't disagree with that. It feels sometimes like Craft wants to be used with that open palette more than digging through folders and subfolders.
And that's what I do, honestly.
Yeah,
That was my solution. Commando,
Yeah. And I think just having more ways into that through more people, for more people would be nice. I think the other sort of weird bit of organization in the application is that parts of it work. It's not, but part of it work kind of like a web browser. Like you have a back and forward button in the toolbar. And if I just hit back and back and back, I'm just seeing all the notes that I've looked at, while we've recorded. And that's cool if you're going like back and forth between multiple things, but you can also open them in tabs, which is really nice. But there's something about like the spatial orientation of I'm moving in between multiple notes or multiple documents feels a little bit strange to me. And maybe that's some of the Catalyst stuff a little bit, but I feel like well, let's just take Apple Notes. I think Obsidian's the same way. You can double click a note and it opens in its own window, and you can just drag that note anywhere you want. And in Craft, that's behind a right click. So open a new window or open a new tab. But then it also pulls with it the sidebars and all the rest of the UI. There's not like a parent-child type view like you have in Apple Notes. And, sometimes it's nice to have a bunch of notes open kind of narrow or small scattered around your screen, and Craft's overall like organization of its UI doesn't really lend itself to that super well.
Yeah. And this kind of gets back to the broad scope of this app. It is a platform to create a shared web page. It's a shared team document system, and it's a personal management system. I mean, it does so many different things that it really, that makes it difficult. Another question I have about the application is the longevity of Catalyst. I mean, they've obviously invested in Catalyst, making that their platform of choice. Apple has now made clear that the way forward is Swift UI, and that's not Catalyst. And how much of a challenge is that to go from Catalyst at some point to Swift UI? And is this app going to hit, roadblocks because they got on the wrong horse at the beginning?
Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of let go of some of that a little bit mentally. I mean, Apple itself is using Catalyst for a bunch of stuff too, like messages. And so I don't know. I mean, it may be an issue 10 years from now, but I don't think it's in the near term. And for now, I think they've chosen the best route for kind of where we are today.
Yeah, and in fairness, I think coming from, Catalyst to Swift UI is going to be a much easier trip than coming from, Electron.
Yeah. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by ZocDoc. ZocDoc makes it easy to find quality doctors in your network and in your neighborhood. Plus, with real verified patient reviews, you can find the right doctor for you. ZocDoc is a free app that shows you doctors who are patient reviewed, take your insurance, and are available when you need them. You can find every specialist under the sun. Whether you're trying to straighten those teeth, fix an achy back, get that mole checked out, or anything else, ZocDoc has you covered. And their mobile app is as easy as ordering a ride to a restaurant or getting delivery to your house. You can search, find, and book doctors with just a few taps. You can find and review local doctors, read verified patient reviews from real people who make real appointments. Now, when you walk into that doctor's office, you're all set to see someone in your network who gets you. So find the doctor that's right for you, book an appointment in person or remotely that works for your schedule. Every month, millions of people use ZocDoc. It's their go to whenever they need to find and book a quality doctor. I definitely believe you should have a trusting relationship with your doctor. Finding the right person is so important, but it can be hard. And using data from other patients is a brilliant way to get started. And you can get started by going to ZocDoc.com/MPU and download the app for free. Then start your search for a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc, ZocDoc.com/MPU. Our thanks to ZocDoc for their support of the show.
Hey, do you want to talk for a minute about how we're using Craft? I mean, we've been kind of bouncing around it the whole episode.
Yeah. Let's start with you. You mentioned that you're using it in a collaboration environment with the team, but also just you. Like, where are those lines drawn, and how has that worked in terms of editing speed? Like, that's one thing that I've seen a lot of questions about with Craft. Like, Google Docs is basically immediate. Like, have you had any weird sync issues with a bunch of people in one
No, I mean,
space?
the sync has been great. I was just on InCraft the other day with JF as we were working on a video, and we were both writing in the document at the same time, and I could see him typing, and he could see me typing. It felt very similar to Google Docs, and so that's good, right? I like how it loads up on everybody's machine. So to back up, I do have a team space, and I've got 5 people in there with me. And some people are in it often and some people are in it rarely. And the way it works is just great. I've set up a folder structure. I've done it very clearly so people can see it. I've been playing with it, getting ready for today's show and doing the research for today's show helped, but also just more experience with the application. I've got like a main page in it where I've set up a very dorky Kanban page. It's not actually Kanban. Kanban has the columns from left to right where you move it by person. Instead, what I've done is I've just listed every person's name, and under it, I'll say active projects for that person, but with the deep linking, I can link it to the individual pages for the project that they're working on. And everybody on the team knows they can go to that one page and see whatever we believe is on their plate. And so that's one place they can go to and see it. We've also added like a sub page, where you go to the right where we can have active questions for that person. So there's one place they can go to see those. So it's like serving a lot of purposes. And I'm in the process of shutting down the Basecamp installation for my team because I think Craft is working out. We've been doing it a couple months. Everybody's working with it fine. The deep linking thing, I can't emphasize enough how useful that is. I talked about already in the show how I use them with OmniFocus, but I put those deep links everywhere. I put deep links in Obsidian notes. Because I've got different systems for different parts of my life, this is what I would call contextual computing, creating a way to draw a laser line from one point to another point on my computer without having to go through a bunch of barriers. And the deep links are what make that possible. And one of the ways I really like deep links is with collaboration, with having team members in Craft. If I want, Leilani to proofread a newsletter, I can text message her a Craft deep link. And because she has Craft installed, she just clicks on the message in the Messages app and it opens up Craft.
Yeah, that's cool.
Drives her straight to that page and she can do the proof for me. And I love that. And I love that not only do we use those deep links inside the Craft database, but we use it all throughout all the team communication platforms. We use Slack a lot, and we've got those links in Slack. Like, you and I could put some of the MPU stuff in Craft, and we could be able to jump to it with a simple deep link. So yeah. I find the deep link combined with the team collaboration stuff to be really worth it. And that's what really got my interest in Craft up and got me kind of restarted with it. But then once I did get restarted with it, I'm like, oh, you know what? There's more uses for this. A lot of my labs members are big Craft users and they want content on it. So I wanted to spend more time with it. But I didn't just do it for that. I did it because I think it's the best solution for some of this stuff. Like, I really like Obsidian. I mean, there's no doubt about that, right? But I also like kind of a pure Obsidian database. And there's a lot of cruft in there. Like when I took the dog to the vet and stuff, where I use Obsidian to develop ideas and work on big things. I feel like Craft is a great place to manage kind of the more traditional PKM stuff.
Hmm.
So I've moved a lot of the life management stuff into my personal craft space. And I find that really useful. It's like, as much as I like Obsidian, when I'm at the vet trying to get to the dog records, using the Obsidian phone app makes me want to throw my phone through the window. And
Sure.
with Craft, it's super easy. Another thing I can do with deep links is I can make a shortcut that says open URL and just put the deep link in it. So I can make a menu launcher to get me to the dog page from my dock. There's just so many ways you could skin that cat. Boy, I'm mixing my dogs and cats here. But
I was going to let it go, but that's okay.
yeah, but there's a lot of things you can do with those deep links on mobile that the Obsidian can do technically, but it's just not as good.
Yeah.
And so I'm finding that it's also a lot of my personal life management stuff is getting shipped over there. But not the like heavy stuff is staying in Obsidian. And so I'm actually finding myself using it more than I expected. And I've been on kind of a 2-month journey with it. I feel like I still have more to learn with this app, but I'm very impressed with the pace of iteration. I'm comfortable with its limits. But I'm also aware of them. Like I do journaling in day one. It's an end-to-end encrypted journaling app. I don't do it in Obsidian. I don't do it in Craft. I do it in the app that's made to journal, But like I said during the show today, I'm okay putting in that daily note in Craft some notes about what I did today in terms of projects I worked on and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if somebody looks at that someday. It doesn't matter, But so I'm actually finding more uses than I thought. I'm opening the app daily now, so I am I'm on the bandwagon, guys. How about you?
So about a year ago, I split my personal notes and work notes. I put personal notes in Apple Notes and work notes in Craft. I thought I want some separation of these things, and that just didn't stick for me. I mean, I use the same task manager for everything. I use the same email client for everything. So I actually ended up moving everything back into Apple Notes, and I haven't been in Craft real heavily until preparing for this episode over the last couple of weeks. And I feel it calling me. I mean, there's so many good things about it that it's just not only better than Apple Notes in a lot of ways in terms of visuals, but some of the deep linking stuff I could be taking advantage of that I don't do now in Apple Notes. So right now I'm not doing anything regularly in it, but I think that may be getting ready to change.
Yeah, agreed. So comparing it to some of these other apps, like Apple Notes is where I think Craft, I strongly believe Craft is aimed at Apple Notes. If you've got Apple Notes and you're a power user of Apple Notes, you may really find Craft appealing because it gives you a lot more tools, and it gives you some things that just Apple Notes I don't think is ever going to do. I kind of hoped that we were going to get backlinking with Apple Notes this year, and we didn't. And maybe Apple just doesn't view it as going down that road. This whole PKM thing is blowing up, so maybe eventually they'll get there. But even if Apple adds backlinking to Apple Notes, I feel like it would take them a long time to get to where Craft is today. And so I think if you're a power Apple Notes user, I think this is something you should look at. Like Steven said, offline attachments aren't there. They're on Apple Notes. So maybe you find a balance where certain things go in certain buckets.
Mm-hmm.
And Steven, I'm totally comfortable using a lot of tools. Like I
Oh, I know.
So, that's kind of my thing, right? And then I can talk about them because I'm always trying them and comparing them.
Yeah.
But not everybody wants to do that, and I get it. And I do think this app really does find a nice sweet spot for people who are PKM curious but don't want to go down into the Obsidian rabbit hole, because Obsidian definitely has a learning curve to it where this app doesn't, or not nearly as steep of a learning curve. Notion is another thing I thought about in comparison to this app because it's got that kind of public sharing stuff. And there are things that Notion does way better than Craft, like tables. The Notion features on tables is, leagues ahead of what Craft does. But there's certain things that Craft does that are better too. Notion has just never really stuck for me. I've tried to use it a few times, and that's one that I have trouble holding on to.
Yeah, I feel like some of the stuff in Craft, some of the layout tools and even the tables to a degree. Like some of that is Notion like, but the feel is so different between those applications. It's hard to compare them. I mean, Notion is basically a web app with a thin wrapper, and Craft, of course, is built with Catalyst. But this is kind of what we're talking about. Craft sort of took, to their credit, the best ideas from a bunch of different places and kind of mixed them all into the best versions of it. And I think that's cool. And it means
Yeah.
that, yeah, I want to work the way Apple Notes works most of the time, but sometimes I want some of these other tools, and like Craft's the only answer for that sort of thing.
Agreed. And then I have been comparing it to Obsidian throughout the show today. I am not giving up Obsidian for Craft. I mean, there's a lot of stuff Obsidian does better than Craft. Like the idea of idea development, research, and stuff. It's hard to beat Obsidian for that stuff. But there are things that it can do that just as good as Obsidian and sometimes better. Like data that you want to access on your iPhone. Boy, putting it in Craft, it's a lot easier to get to it. And I think that it's not really a simple answer. Like, there's nothing wrong with using them both and trying them and seeing like which one sticks for you. But some of the big like counterpoints are what I would call like kind of ubiquity of data versus pretty data, for lack of a better term. I mean, the fundamental premise of Obsidian is you put a folder on your computer and fill it with markdown notes, and Obsidian magically turns that into something so much better than what it was. And that's the appeal of that app. And as the users keep adding more plugins, it just gets better and better, and it is really impressive. You get that to a degree with Craft, but it's not a folder full of markdown folders. You can't just like, even though it's easy to export, it's not the same thing as saying, oh yeah, I can copy this to Dropbox or do anything at any time, and there's never a risk. And Obsidian gives you that. The other thing is kind of a pace of evolution. Craft is evolving nicely and quickly, and Obsidian is evolving blindingly fast, which could be a positive or could be a negative, depending on your thought. For me, someone like me, I like that. I like that every week there's new plugins that can completely change the way you use the app. I mean, that's awesome. The Craft is a more sane pace, but it is a good pace nonetheless. But there's big differences. And what I would say to somebody is try them both and see. You're going to know pretty quickly which one lands with you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I mean, at the end of the day, these are all applications to store and retrieve data, but they do all work so differently. You're going to find something that you like. And we've talked about this before with these other applications. There's a real richness right now in this category where if something doesn't work for you, like there will be something out there that does. You just got to go find it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of other apps like arriving here now. And, we waited 1.5 years for Craft because I wanted to make sure it had staying power before I recommended it to people. But there's a bunch of apps, and I'm going to hear from people when this publishes. Well, what about app X, Y, or Z? And there's web services now. There's all these different ways to do this because people realize there's a need for it. My one piece of advice is it's fun to check those apps out, but be careful about investing in brand new apps or apps without a monetary plan, a way to stay in business. Like Obsidian and Craft are two apps that I feel confident have a business model that makes sense, So like those are the two I would recommend checking out if you're interested in this stuff. Or Apple Notes, which they have a business model too. Let's just put $1 trillion in the bank and make some apps, But be careful about some of the newer apps. Let them season a bit before you invest your data and your time into them.
Well said.
All right. Well, we've done a show on Obsidian. We've done a show on Craft, so we can link the Obsidian show here too if you want to hear kind of the counterpoint of all that. And I'm very curious to hear from our listeners. I suspect there are a lot of Mac Power users that are already deep into Craft, and I bet the comments on this show and the forums will be fun to read. You can find those over at talk.macpowerusers.com. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. And anything fun going on at 512 Pixels these days, Steven?
I'm in calendar land.
Yeah.
I did just write this piece about July 17th, which is World Emoji Day, and why it's on July 17th. So, yeah, I'll throw that in the show notes.
Yeah, that's also Disneyland's birthday.
There you go.
All right, thanks to our sponsors, 1Password, Squarespace, SourceGraph, and ZocDoc, and we'll see you next time.